Every child deserves to grow up and live in a loving, safe home with parents or guardians who will love and cherish them. But as we see far too often, these people who are so very blessed to have children in their lives see them as nothing more than inconveniences, things that are just getting in the way of them living the life they want. And for today's case, that is exactly how Louise Porton saw her precious angels. She decided that having a sex life and partying was more important than being a mother to her 2 babies. And what happened as a result is truly devastating. Louise Porton was 19 years old in 2015 when she and her then boyfriend, Chris Draper, gave birth to their first daughter, Lexi Draper, in Walsall, England. They stayed together for about a year after that before Louise became pregnant once again. However, before her second child was born, she and Chris broke up and she started dating a new man. So when her second daughter, Scarlett, was born, Louise prevented Chris from being there and gave her the last name of the man she was currently with, Vaughn. However, those two also eventually broke up. So even though Lexi and Scarlett both had the same father, Louise opted to give them different last names. Chris tried to be involved with his daughters after their births, but Louise prevented him from ever even meeting Scarlett. Then, after breaking up with the second boyfriend by late 2017, Louise decided to move to Rugby, England, which was about 55 kilometers away from where she was once living with Chris. From there, she pretty much completely cut off contact with Chris, and he never saw his daughters after that. Of course, being such a young single mother with 2 children is not easy. It's never easy. However, according to Louise's mother and sister, she always did her best to give her daughters the best life possible. She wanted to be a good mother, and anytime she needed support, her family was right there with her. She worked hard to make ends meet, to provide for her kids, splitting her time between work to make money and being home with the girls to care for them. But again, being that Louise was so young, she still wanted to live a fun, carefree life. She wanted to be social, go out with friends, and party. She wanted to go out on dates, meet boys her age, and not have to worry about all the responsibilities she had waiting for her at home. According to friends and family members, by around August of 2017, Louise started spending more and more time doing social things, leaving her daughters with family members to look after them. Eventually, a pattern of behavior started to emerge for Louise. Even though she was barely making ends meet, she spent almost every weekend drinking and partying, spending most of her money on booze. On the weekdays, she would find any excuse to spend time on her own, always finding reasons to leave her kids with someone else. It was starting to seem to those around Louise that she was tired of being a mother and juggling the responsibilities that came with it. During this time, Child Protective Services were called to investigate Louise and her girls a few times, but anytime they visited, the girls seemed happy, healthy, and content. They appeared well cared for, and even though Louise was stressed, and even though she was spending more and more time away from her children, she always made sure that someone was there to watch them. She was feeding them, she was still working, so nothing ever stood out as concerning enough for Child Protective Services to actually step in. By January of 2018, though, it seemed like 3-year-old Lexi started experiencing bouts of health problems, landing her multiple hospital stays. On January 2nd, Louise called 999 to report that Lexi had been vomiting, was having trouble breathing, and became unresponsive in the middle of the night. In that call, she was instructed through CPR until paramedics arrived, who then rushed her to the hospital. Thankfully, Lexi turned out to be okay. She was soon discharged from the hospital with antibiotics, as doctors believed that she had some sort of chest infection. I want to note that they weren't exactly sure what caused her to have trouble breathing, so after ruling everything else out, they were left with the assumption that it must have just been a chest infection. But then, 2 days later, on January 4th, Lexi ended up in the hospital once again after having difficulty breathing. Once again, she was discharged with antibiotics, feeling that she had a persistent chest infection. By January 15th, 2018, Louise made a third 999 call, this time reporting that she had just went into 3-year-old Lexi's room to check on her, only to find that she was lying unresponsive in her bed once again. When the dispatcher asked if she was breathing, Louise responded simply with a no.
Ambulance service, is the patient breathing?
No.
They're not breathing?
No.
Okay. And who was it we're talking about?
Lexi, she's 3.
She's 3. Bear with
Yeah.
me. Okay. So she's unconscious and she's not breathing. So help has been arranged, okay?
By the time paramedics arrived, Lexi had no pulse, she wasn't breathing, and was cold to the touch. It appeared that she was already deceased. Despite this, she was still transported to the hospital and life-saving measures were attempted, but it was too late. By the time 3-year-old Lexi arrived to the hospital, she was pronounced dead. At that time, there were no obvious explanations for how she ended up dead. No injuries, no trauma, nothing. Louise also told hospital staff that she had no idea what happened. She didn't fall. She didn't have any sort of accident. She didn't seem to be sick or anything like that. This just appeared to have happened totally out of the blue. So after Lexi's heartbreaking death, her body was sent to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. For the weeks that followed, the medical examiner struggled to find any cause of death, though, as most of us know, an autopsy typically takes several weeks, so those who knew Lexi and those investigating her case held their breath as they waited for answers. But then, by February 1st, 2018, just 17 days after Lexi's death and just 2 days after her funeral, Louise made yet another call, this time to the non-emergency medical helpline. She reported that 17-month-old Scarlett had also become sick. The dispatcher for this call offered to send out paramedics, but Louise said that Scarlett was already in the car and they were already on their way to the hospital. This was very odd because, again, Louise called the non-emergency line to report Scarlett's condition, yet told the dispatcher that there wasn't enough time to wait for paramedics. She would be driving her to the hospital herself. But before going to the hospital, it was later found that Louise stopped at a gas station to fill up her car. While there, she ran into the convenience store to grab a couple of items. She then drove over to a retail mall where she pulled over and finally decided to call emergency services. This time, she did allow an ambulance to meet her at her car to get Scarlett medical help. Once again, though, by the time first responders arrived just 9 minutes later, it appeared to be too late. Scarlett was found in her car seat, unresponsive and not breathing. 2 paramedics, it appeared once again like Scarlett had already been dead for quite some time. But just like they did with her sister, they attempted to bring her back anyways, rushing her to the hospital. But tragically, by the time 17-month-old baby Scarlett arrived to the hospital, she was beyond help and was pronounced dead on February 1st, 2018. Once again, hospital staff found no obvious reasons for Scarlett's sudden death, and once again, Louise claimed that it must have been a natural death, something that happened totally out of the blue because there were no accidents. There was nothing else that could explain how she suddenly collapsed. Up to this point, investigators didn't really have much reason to believe that 3-year-old Lexi's death involved any foul play. Again, she had no signs of trauma, nothing to signify that she was murdered. However, Louise's second child was now also dead less than 3 weeks later, also with no signs of injury. This just did not sit right with investigators. They knew that something had to be going on here, so they began an investigation into Louise Porton. When they took her into the station for an interview, it appeared that she was cold, emotional, and uncaring. She gave a police statement, which appeared to have been prepared and practiced. She said plainly, "I still don't know how my daughters died or what caused it." After speaking with her, they then spoke with first responders and hospital staff who saw Lexi and Scarlett in their final moments. They also began looking into Louise's cell phone data, which included messaging apps, internet browsing history, and social media posts. They found that during those 2 prior incidents involving Lexi going into respiratory distress, paramedics noticed that Louise didn't seem all that concerned. She was a bit upset, but she wasn't crying, she wasn't distressed, nor was she asking questions about Lexi's well-being. One first responder even said that when they arrived, Louise had a glass of wine in her hand. They also noted that both times they transported Lexi and Scarlett to the hospital, it appeared that each girl was already dead before they got there and had been for quite some time. It appeared to them that Louise had waited a prolonged period of time after their deaths to make those 999 calls. I also want to note that investigators looked into CCTV footage from the areas around where Louise was last known to be around the time of her daughter's deaths. Now, at the time of Scarlett's death, Louise and her were staying in a hotel. CCTV footage from earlier in the day on February 1st showed Louise and Scarlett walking into the hotel with Scarlett looking happy, energetic, and healthy. But footage from hours later that same day showed Louise carrying a limp and unmoving Scarlett from the hotel to their car. Something happened in that room, causing Scarlett's collapse. It was believed that she could have already been dead when she was placed into that car. Then, after getting Scarlett into the car and while calling the non-emergency line, as I stated, Louise stopped at a gas station to fill up and went into the store to grab some items. These stops were caught on CCTV footage, and on that footage, Louise appeared calm and collected. It appeared that Scarlett was still in the car, and if it were true that she was experiencing a medical event while in the car, Louise clearly didn't seem all that concerned about it. She wasn't worried about getting Scarlett to the hospital or wasn't stressed about her condition. Either that or Scarlett was already dead and she was trying to wait long enough to make sure she couldn't be saved before paramedics got to her. Now going back to Lexi's hospital stays. Doctors and nurses at the hospital said much of the same. During those prior stays, they noticed that Louise didn't seem all that concerned for Lexi's well-being. She was unemotional and spent a lot of time in the bathroom away from her daughter. Then, upon looking into her cell phone, it turned out that Louise had been on dating apps and was messaging different men, sending nude photos that she took at the hospital in that bathroom while offering sexual acts in exchange for money. This is all happening while Lexi is lying in that hospital bed after experiencing respiratory distress. She was left alone in her hospital room so that her mother could go in the bathroom and send nudes. Then, the day after Lexi's death on January 16th, officers found that Louise had accepted 41 friend requests on the dating app Meet Me and was also messaging with men on another app, Badoo. In one message sent to a man named Dave, Louise said, "My little girl passed away yesterday." He gave his condolences, and she replied, "It's all right," before changing the subject to talk about her leg tattoos. A few days later, she was seen arranging a date with yet another man on that dating app. Then, according to reports, Louise was heard laughing at Lexi's funeral while talking with some man. It appeared that Louise was not bothered at all by Lexi's death. She seemed to move on very quickly. Her focus wasn't on mourning her daughter or spending extra time with her other daughter to grieve their loss. her focus was on talking to men. Now, some people might argue that we can't judge how someone grieves, and that's true. Maybe she just had this avoidant personality and didn't want to think about her daughter dying, so she filled up her time with anything and everything she could to avoid thinking about it, to avoid being upset and having to face the reality that she lost her daughter. But she was literally dying in her hospital bed while she was doing these things. She didn't have to grieve her daughter at that point. She just had to be there for her. She also had another daughter who also experienced the loss that is losing her big sister, and Louise was not there for her either. So no matter what you want to say about how she chose to grieve, if that's what you want to say it was inappropriate regardless, because she did have that other daughter. I don't think she was grieving at all, but that is what some people might say, but I still think regardless, it's just not appropriate. To me, I think this clearly shows that she didn't care too much about her young children dying, which of course is a red flag in and of itself. But then, after investigators looked into her internet search history, they found even more damning evidence. They found that around the same time that Lexi had been in and out of the hospital, Louise had spent some time researching cases in which children had died from the flu. Then, a few days after Lexi was discharged from the hospital for a second time, Louise made multiple more concerning searches, including: how long does it take for a dead body to get cold? Can you actually die if you have a blocked nose and cover your mouth with tape? And why did my 3-year-old stop breathing? She then searched for how long after drowning can someone be resuscitated, before accessing articles about toddlers who had been brought back to life after nearly drowning to death. As investigators were finding all that concerning information on Louise's phone, Scarlett's body was undergoing her initial autopsy, while Lexi's body was undergoing a second. Lexi's first autopsy came back as inconclusive, so now with all of this new information coming to light, they felt that a second look was warranted. These autopsy examinations ended up determining that both girls actually died as a result of obstructed airways. Once again, there wasn't a lot of evidence found on Lexi's body, but they found clear signs of neck compression on Scarlett. At that time, investigators found a pillow within the home with spots of the girls' blood on it, which suggested that Louise had killed both girls by smothering them with that pillow. By this point, investigators have put together what they believe to be a clear picture of what happened. Louise had been spending her time on dating apps, advertising herself as a model as she met with all sorts of different men. At the same time, those around her started to notice her take less and less interest in her duties as a mother and was spending more and more time away from her children. At some point, it appears that Louise made the decision that she no longer wanted her children around. Instead, she wanted all the time in the world to hook up with some dudes and live her life. So she first attempted to take her daughter's life on January 2nd, but paramedics brought her back. She tried again 2 days later, but once again, Lexi's life was spared. It's thought that she called paramedics and got her to the hospital so that it appeared like she was a worried mother, secretly hoping that they wouldn't actually be able to save her. But they did. So due to this, she started researching ways to kill her children, such as drowning or covering their mouths, as well as how long she needed to wait before calling an ambulance to ensure they couldn't be saved. Less than 2 weeks after those first 2 attempts at Lexi's life, Louise finally smothered her to death, waiting until after she was already dead before calling for help. As her daughter lied dead or dying at the hospital those 3 times, she was on dating apps, messaging men and sending them nudes that, again, she took in the bathroom while Lexi was still in the hospital room with her. After Lexi's death, Louise did the same thing to her other daughter, Scarlett. She couldn't even wait a month before taking the pillow to Scarlett's face and smothering her in that hotel room. After smothering her, she carried her to the car, then pretended like she was driving to the hospital. but instead of actually going to the hospital, again, she made those various stops at the gas station and store. Investigators think that she did this to make it look like she was trying to get to the hospital, but in reality, it was all for show. After being confident that Scarlett was dead, she finally called an ambulance. With both of her children, she tried to make it seem like they just happened to die as paramedics were on their way. But the first responders knew better. They knew what a dying but still alive body felt like. And they knew that by the time they reached both of those girls, they had already been dead for a while. Maybe she could have gotten away with Lexi's death, but there was absolutely no way that both of her little girls just died of natural causes within just weeks of one another. Given those Google searches, her bizarre demeanor, and everything else we know about this case, investigators believed that Louise killed her 3-year-old and her 17-month-old. Why? Because they were making it harder for her to live her life and have sex with random men. After putting all of these pieces together, officers were finally able to charge 21-year-old Louise Porton with the premeditated murder of her 2 daughters. She pleaded not guilty, and for the year that followed, Louise awaited her trial in jail. Then, finally, by August of 2019, the trial for the murders of 3-year-old Lexi Draper and 17-month-old Scarlett Vaughn began. The prosecution argued basically everything I've told you up to this point. They said that Louise killed her 2 babies because they got in the way of her sex life. She was tired of being a mother, so she killed them. They brought forward all of the evidence which shows that while her children were dying, all Louise cared about was getting dates and sending nudes. She literally couldn't care less. They also talked about how both times paramedics showed up to the scene to try and save each girl, they were already dead. Those Google searches show that she searched for how long to wait to ensure the girls couldn't be saved after 2 failed attempts at taking Lexi's life. They talked about the autopsy findings, which stated that both girls died as a result of airway obstruction. Based on that blood found on the pillow, Louise most likely suffocated those girls to death by smothering them with that pillow. Both deaths were intentional murders planned and carried out by a woman who was more interested in having a sex life than being a mother. On the other hand, the defense claimed that both of those girls died as a result of natural causes. Louise loved her children, talking about how they never failed to make her laugh and smile. She was a young mother, so of course she still wanted to go out on dates and have a good time, but she did all that, making sure to schedule it around her daughters. Just because she went out and had fun, that doesn't mean she murdered her children. They tried claiming that those Google searches weren't at all related to her children's deaths. They also noted that the CCTV footage from the hotel doesn't prove that Scarlett was dead when she was carried to the car from the hotel. She could have been asleep. In both Lexi and Scarlett's deaths, the only reason paramedics were too late was because she didn't realize how dire their conditions were. That was the only reason it appears like she waited too long to get any help. But at the end of the trial, both sides made their closing arguments and the jury was off for deliberations, and it wasn't long before they came back with their decision, finding that Louise Porton, now 23 years old, is in fact guilty of the premeditated murder of both of her children. At the sentencing hearing, the judge called Louise an evil, calculating woman who took the lives of her 2 young daughters because they simply got in the way of the life she wanted to live. She could have asked her parents for help. She could have even asked other family members to take them. She could have given up custody to their father. Instead, she took 2 lives without a second thought. She had so many other options, but she chose the most vicious, brutal way possible, ending the lives of her 2 beautiful daughters, all so that she could have a carefree, stress-free life, having as much sex as she wanted with whatever man she wanted. The judge stated, quote, One way or another, you squeezed the life out of your daughters, only calling the emergency services when you knew they were dead. I am sure at the time of their deaths, you intended to kill each of your daughters. For her crimes, Louise was handed a life sentence with a minimum of 32 years spent behind bars before she will be eligible for release. I do think that, given that this is a case coming from the UK, that seems almost appropriate for her crimes, although 32 years is not even close to enough for what she did, so I hope that she's never actually released. Then, in the aftermath of Louise's convictions, everyone who loved those two girls were left with the heartbreak and trauma of what they lost. They lost a lifetime of love, laughter, and joy with those two girls. They lost the chance to watch them grow up and become the amazing young women they could have been. And for Louise's mother, the girl's grandmother, Sharon Porton, it was far too much to bear. By February of 2020, at the age of just 48 years old, Sharon took her own life. After her body was found and news spread of this tragedy, Sharon's niece stated, quote, "She was tormented and upset by her daughter Louise and what she did. She couldn't handle the fact that her daughter had murdered her two grandchildren and felt it hard to live with the taunts and verbal abuse of people who knew." So that truly goes to show that cases like this don't just affect the perpetrators and their victims. They affect their families, friends, community, and everyone who knew and loved those little girls. But that's where the case sits as of right now, and now I want to hear what you all think. Do you think Louise is guilty, or do you believe her story? Do you think there was enough evidence to convict her, and why do you think she did this? Was it truly because she just got tired of being a mother? Let's discuss this and any other thoughts you have in the comments below. If you liked this video, please make sure to go ahead and leave this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week. Don't forget to turn the notification bell on so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Make sure to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Spotify. All will be linked down below. And if you have any case suggestions, please make sure to fill out the Google form, which is also listed down below. With that, I hope you guys have an amazing week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.